I'd like to remind you all that only paranoid nutjobs don't blindly trust their governments. I am one of those nutjobs. Is there a genuine cause for concern, or am I crazy? I suppose the idea of democracy means that surely government can be trusted, because we elected them, and if they act against our best interest, then we'd oust them and get other people in. And that would be a fair point if, and this is a pretty big if, what happened in office was actually transparent. And I would argue that it's not currently transparent, and furthermore, our democratic process only really elects the dancing monkeys, but not the organ grinders. In less abstract terms, a governmental office isn't a building of elected officials making decisions with other elected officials. It's a room of elected officials braying and hooting at one another while a hive of unelected advisors, bureaucrats, and lobbyists mill around, write policy, and pull the levers behind closed doors. And we as a citizenry very rarely see beyond the happenings of the hooting room unless a particular snippet of braise makes for good television. And here's one of our biggest issues. The entities that are meant to be keeping the citizenry informed of what's happening in office only focus on the hooting room and very rarely give us a look under the hood. I.e., we, the citizens, are rarely kept in the loop regarding policy in a meaningful way. We generally won't hear about laws unless they've just been proposed or they're just coming into law. The trusted custodians of truth that are meant to give us the facts have become peddlers of sensationalism, spin, sport coverage, and heartwarming stories about orphan puppies winning at the county fair. The reality of the current situation is as follows. A minority of elected officials flap their lips in the name of their constituents as a majority of meaningful decisions and policies are made by an unelected body of bureaucrats and lobbyists. The watchdogs, or referees, have become vehicles of governmental decree, or operate as entertainers, resulting in an erosion of transparency, scrutiny, or accountability. And the closest form of accountability in this situation is a bit of inconsequential finger-pointing at the previous administration, not to punish or to hold anyone responsible, but to absolve the actions or inactions of those currently in office and to shift blame on someone else. And while this initial lack of accountability, transparency, and unchecked power can simply manifest into the relaxing of regulation for industry, it eventually turns into other dodgy deals, bribes, expensive lunches, and other behaviors categorized as cronyism. Though unsavory, the general public rarely sees these malignancies as a cause for concern. Unfortunately, this pathology can develop into governmental overreach, cloak and dagger power grabs, and eventually turn into full-blown authoritarianism if left unchecked. As the actions of the state become more opaque, and as our sources for truth and information, i.e. the media, become more impotent, the political sphere becomes increasingly attractive to bad actors as the potential for personal gain increases as the likelihood of being caught decreases. This inversion of risk-reward is an irresistible beacon to the worst people our society has to offer. Highly intelligent people with no scruples and a thirst for power and money. Unfortunately, there's a particular dichotomy in contemporary Western society, where politicians, we all know, are untrustworthy liars, but governments somehow become benevolent and exist for the good of the nation and its people. This begs at the very least a perplexed head-scratch, considering the same politicians are responsible for the governance of our governments. Try saying that twice. For some reason, normal human beings with their own motives and needs turn into virtuous paragons once in office. At what point is a politician screened? At what point is their moral character scrutinized or tested? And at what point do they cease to be human and metamorphosize into beautiful paragons? The game of getting elected doesn't test virtue, moral character, or the understanding of economics, human psychology, or otherwise. The electoral game, on the contrary, tests a politician's aptitude for branding, slander, manipulation, barefaced lying. All feats of charisma, but not character. And if anything, by choosing our politicians based on the current electoral popularity contest, we invariably select for politicians with a set of character traits better suited for heading crime syndicates than leading nations. And hence my confusion when we operate under the assumption that governmental office is a place full of informed, benevolent, trustworthy people. Depending on the study, sociopaths make up about 2 to 6% of the population. And though the term sociopath isn't diagnostic in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, or the DSM, it does fall under the banner of antisocial personality disorder. The traits of ASPD and those associated with sociopathy are as follows: propensity for lying, low to no empathy, a sense of superiority, narcissism, exploitation of others, low morality, and an inability to take personal responsibility. Does that sound familiar to you? The number is hard to pin down, but I would wager that since a big part of sociopathy involves being good at and habitually lying, that there are probably more of them in existence than a meager 2 to 6% statistic. I am not casting judgment on these people, nor am I proposing a witch hunt. This is just to highlight empirically that there is a significant, ambitious, and capable subset of the population who have little or no conscience, are highly intelligent, attracted to power, and have a propensity for lying and manipulation. For all my D&D bros out there, these people are either chaotic or lawful evil, with high int and high charisma. I'm not attempting to make the conclusion that everyone in politics is a sociopath. There is plenty of evidence to demonstrate low IQs and dim wits in public office. I also have absolute certainty that there are those in politics with the hopes of making the world a better place, and I commend them for it. That being said, the more opaque and more lucrative politics gets, the more attractive these positions become to the worst kinds of people. In the words of Friedrich August von Hayek, in politics, scum rises to the top. And regardless of an individual's motives to get into politics, they'll never be paragons, they'll never be perfect. They are in fact just people, with their own motives, beliefs, values, and shortcomings. The levers of power are alluring to the worst and to the best of us, and there's immense potential for personal gain. So unless the incentives to act forthrightly outweigh the incentives to act maliciously, we create a dangerous situation. Hence, we need to have ways of keeping an eye on those in positions of power, because they are in fact only human. And this is why successful governments throughout history have checks, balances, and try and keep power from centralizing. Before I rapidly gloss over the US system of checks and balances, there's a good summary of this exact thing by Crash Course. There's a link down there somewhere. If you want something more meaty, I'd suggest reading Plato's Republic. Damn, I was supposed to have it in my hand so I could pull it up and be like, yeah, I'm smart, I read books. But, I put that in my backdrop so that I look smart and read books. Ignore the fact that most of it's Terry Pratchett and Harry Potter. Anyway, Plato's Republic, or The Path to Tyranny by Michael Newton. I'm using the US model of governance as my example, since American culture is so ubiquitous in the West that I, an Egyptian, have an American accent, and I thank Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and American influence for that. It's also useful to remember that the American system was built on the framework of the Roman Republic. You know, that thing that slowly succumbed to corruption from within and collapsed in on itself due to a failure of its citizens to quash tyrants and failure of leaders to hold true to their ethos and their values and their morality. But that's a topic for another time. Anyway, the Western system of governmental power is split across 3 branches. The executive, this is the monarch or the president, and they approve or veto laws and they appoint judges. The legislative, the Senate, the House, this is Parliament in the UK model. They write laws and they approve of presidential appointment. And then we've got the judicial, this is the court system. They decide if laws are in line with the Constitution, and they can overturn rulings from the other 2 parties. These 3 factions each have inclusive power to stop the other branches from overstepping their bounds. These 3 factions are nested within the constraints of a country's constitution, which underpins the laws that the government and the citizen are protected by, and more importantly, expected to protect. In order for the citizenry to be informed, there should also be one more power at play: a free and independent press that is legally protected from government censorship. The only restriction placed upon them is to simply not lie. Since truth and reason have maintained their ground against false opinions, in league with false facts, the press confined to truth needs no other legal restraint. And that was Thomas Jefferson in 1805. The original role of the press was to keep an eye on corporate and government shenanigans. They existed to ensure we were informed of any funny business behind the scenes, so the press was originally paid for by the people in order to keep the people informed. A far cry from today. It doesn't take much sleuthing to find that the press is owned by a handful of corporate bodies, and currently we're also seeing them receive massive hits of funding from governments the world over. Does that sound like a free and independent press? I suppose it's at least free because we aren't paying for it. The entities that the press is meant to be keeping an eye on are the ones paying them. A layman, or even a child, would call that a bribe, or at the very least, a conflict of interest. Here it is again. An increase in centralization with a sharp decline in transparency or accountability. Precursors to the rot of corruption. But this is a topic for another time, so I shall invite you to raise an eyebrow with me. I can't control my eyebrows individually, and I promise to elaborate on it next time. But for now, let's summarize what we've done so far. The great power associated with governing a people is very attractive to the worst our species has to offer. We all have a part to actively keep these bad actors out of office, or at the very least make the positions they seek unappealing. Anyone sitting upon the seat of power should feel the gaze of all they serve firmly upon them. This position of leadership shouldn't afford personal privilege or be too comfortable. It should be a burden, a solemn duty, with a sword of Damocles looming overhead. The political sphere should be full of informed and honest citizens. The political sphere, well, I mean, that's actually true, but you should have citizens, not politicians in office. The political sphere should be full of informed and honest civil servants, martyrs to their constituents and willing to sit under the sword for the betterment of those they serve and the values they are meant to uphold. And if we ever do find a way to fill our houses of governance with these martyrs, we would still be wise to never forget Lord Acton's famous words. Power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Therefore, there must always be a way to ensure that those with the most power are under the most restriction and scrutiny. How? A system of checks and balances, coupled with a vigilant and mindful citizenry that fosters and rewards independent and honest watchdogs that look past the posturing of the hooting room and keep an eye on the man behind the curtain. Unfortunately, the seat of power is becoming more powerful, and while the keen sword that once hung above it has dulled with time, the fine horsehair that once held it precariously above the heads of those who chose to rule has been replaced by a sturdy chain. The systems that kept this power in check have been eroded, and the wardens tasked to We're almost there, man. The systems that kept this power in check have been eroded, and the wardens tasked to keep watch. Fuck, I'm a dick. The systems that keep this power in check have been eroded, and the wardens tasked to keep watch over the fools under the sword have become the servants of those very fools. The potential for personal profit for the few at the cost of the many is at an all-time high, and the seat of power has never looked so appealing to the would-be tyrants of tomorrow. Am I missing something? Am I blind? To say things smell fishy would be an understatement. So as a blind man once said,
"Woo! Good morning, ladies."
And if things were the way they should be, would our system of government still be worthy of blind trust? Well, according to those that built the foundations of our current governmental systems, government is never really worthy of blind trust, almost as if they just finished fighting off tyrannical governments themselves. Whether we're talking the Greeks, the Romans, the Brits, the Yanks, those that built the backbone of our current system of governance in the West have always understood how susceptible any system of governance is to tyranny. So they built checks and balances into these systems to keep the tyrants at bay, demonstrating excellent forethought as well as an honest and deeply cynical understanding of human nature. Therefore, to blindly trust in government of a free nation, while being afforded the freedoms that nation provides, is like spitting in the eyes of the giants whose shoulders not only you stand upon, but the shoulders that hold up your entire nation. That got all serious again. I should have closed on that Afro-Man quote and left it at that. But it's now your turn. What do you think about what I've said? Do you trust your government? Am I a paranoid nutjob? Am I wrong to think that something fishy's going on? Do you think the media tells us what we need to know? Do you think I'm wrong and stupid and wrong and smelly and fat? There's a like button and subs and whatever, depending on what platform we're talking on right now. But do those things if you liked what you heard. Finally, a question. helped me conceptualize a future one of these talks. What do you think the role of government is? Has that role changed over time? And I also realized that this topic isn't very nice. Very, good on you for sticking it out to the end. It's actually quite awful to think that this might be how things are. You might feel that the ground's been taken out from under you. But that's the first step to fixing something that's wrong, realizing that something isn't right. And secondly, I'd like to remind you that you're not alone. And even though you might feel alone out there in the world, surrounded by people that just blindly go with things, that you shouldn't feel powerless and you shouldn't feel alone. One last little bit of positivity. Bad guys always lose. Mighty Ducks. Thanks for watching. See you next time.
Sensible sedition.
Use your brain and think for yourself.
Sensible sedition.
You shouldn't blindly trust government.
Sensible sedition.
Using your brain 'cause you're not as stupid.